Hey friends, tonight we'll walk right through the heart of women of the war. Quiet courage stories. A soft rain rinses the streets, and the night settles gently over shuttered windows. The world seems to breathe more slowly as lamps pull their small, steady halos. Before we begin, please like and subscribe only if this truly helps you unwind. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, lie back and get comfortable. Let's begin tonight's story. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to our tale of women of the war. Quiet Courage Stories, Chapter 1, Whispers Behind the Lines. The night keeps its own careful ledger. It tallies footfalls along cobbles, smoothed by years of markets and marches. It writes in quiet ink, steam rising from a kettle, a shutter's shy creak, a pencil's soft run over paper that might change a life. In cities where sirens once traced pale arcs across the sky, the darkness remembers a different kind of bravery. One that moves without drums or banners, one that speaks in a lowered voice and touches the world with steady hands. Here is a street where the stones remember. The rain has made them sleek, and the reflections on their wet faces turn the lamps into little moons. A woman passes beneath them with a calm that looks like shadow. The scarf at her throat is tied in a knot she was taught in a room where names were never written, only breathed. In her coat's inner seam, a thin paper sleeps its letters, a careful river, its meaning a bridge between villages that have never met. She is a courier tonight. She knows the places where the walls lean close, where voices ricochet, where a solitary step can sound like a crowd if fear is allowed to scatter it. She does not allow it. She walks as if the night itself were in step with her, and perhaps it is, for the rain, too, seems to hold its breath. At the corner bakery, the shutters look harmless. Flour dust threads the air like morning ghosts that forgot to leave. Yet behind the sacks, beneath the boards, a radio waits, small, stubborn, the heart of a star that would rather whisper than burn. A second woman listens with eyes half closed, the better to keep the map in her head from blurring. The voices that arrive across impossible distances are almost tender. A call sign, a string of numbers, and a lullaby in code. She copies them with a pencil worn to a stub, turning the world's terror into marks that can be carried by coat linings and hymns. She thinks of the sky as a vast sea and herself as a small, faithful boat, rocking to the rhythm of a voice that says, "Hold fast, land is near, far away and not far at all." Another woman opens a small tin locket and sees, just for a breath, two faces that look up without judgment. A child who always asks about the moon, an elder whose hands can sew by touch. She is a nurse tonight. In her pocket, a spool of gauze. In her other pocket, a square of chocolate saved from ration day. The ward's lights are softened, the curtains pulled halfway to make islands of gentle light where pain can become less sharp. She moves with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned the miracle of ordinary things. Water warmed just enough. A word set down like a blanket, a bandage that holds because the hands that wrap it believe in morning. The air is clean and smells faintly of antiseptic and soap. Somewhere a kettle clicks and sighs. She murmurs stories she knows by heart. A farm where blackberries climb fences, a river that hums like a kindly machine, and a kitchen where the table holds all the elbows of the world. And so the men who have been lifted out of fire dream for 1 hour of dew, in a factory where daylight once sang through long panes of glass, the night has been permitted to stay. It stands tall between rows of riveters and fitters. Women whose sleeves are rolled and whose hair is tied not just to keep it safe, but to keep it out of despair's reach. Each strike of the tool is deliberate. Metal meets metal, and the sound is not harsh tonight. It is metronome, pulse, and proof that the earth still keeps time. Beside a toolbox sits a tin of biscuits with 3 left. 2 will go home to the aunt who taught her to mend. 1 to the boy next door who likes to say the names of countries as if they are flavors. She imagines one of these planes banking over a silver coast, its wings sure, its rivets true. She thinks of how every small act gathers into something that can cross oceans. And then there is the teacher who turned her classroom into a harbor. She writes lessons that are part arithmetic, part weather forecast, part courage. A chalk line becomes a railway. A map with missing pieces becomes a way to talk about how to be human. When the world behaves like a storm, she keeps a ledger for her students, not of grades, but of small glories. A delicious sentence read aloud, a knitted cap finished, a loaf of bread shared. When the air outside grows mean with rumour, she reads a poem about a candle in winter and watches as 20 faces, each newly acquainted with uncertainty, soften in the glow of words arranged the way a generous table is set. Our mother stands by the sink where the tap's thin stream is steady, persistent, a river in miniature that teaches patience. She slices the loaf into equitable portions and calls these arithmetic as well. She turns ration cards into family grammar. A sentence can be shorter and still be true. A stew can be thinner and still carry warmth. Her patience feels like a blanket that has been darned again and again. Instead of growing poorer, it grows full of histories that make it stronger. She writes a letter by the window, and though she knows the censors will read it, she writes as if only one pair of eyes will see. And those eyes will be grateful to learn that the hydrangeas are blooming despite it all. Somewhere, a girl who has never been asked to be brave finds herself wearing bravery like a coat that fits. She walks a lane that seems longer in the dark, and at the fence post she leaves a parcel wrapped in brown paper and twine. Inside, pressed between 2 handkerchiefs, are names she has collected like seashells and kept safe from tide and boot. She does not watch the house across the field, but she feels it, alive and listening. The breeze tugs at her hem, and she imagines it is the world's hand, urging her along. She goes, the parcel left, the thread she follows invisible but firm, and so the river of the night flows on, its banks made of doorways and stairs. There is a grandmother who knows the exact knot that makes a line look like laundry and not like a message. There is the baker's wife who can turn flour dust into cover, press a slip of paper into a palm along with the day's last roll. There is the clerk at the station who knows which trains are late because of reasons that can't be printed, and who passes a glance like a sealed letter. Now, there is the singer in the cafe who lowers the key of a familiar song at a specific word, so that those who need to leave will hear their cue not with the ear but with the skin. The world becomes a network of quiet, a music written for the body to understand. History, later, will speak of dates and movements, of treaties and generals and lines that were drawn then redrawn. But there is a history that lives under that history, a tide not charted on maps. It moves in the way a chair has been pulled just so to make a shadow appear harmless. It moves in the way a recipe has been altered to stretch grace. It moves in letters that begin with ordinary weather and end with a coordinate buried in a sentence about wool. It moves in the way a hand rests for a second longer on a shoulder, leaving a permission that cannot be revoked by decree. One evening, the courier returns to the lane where the sycamores lean over like conspirators. The rain has lightened to a mist that hangs in the air and turns her scarf into a small, private cloud. She stops by the iron gate and counts to 30, not as superstition but as rhythm. A bicycle's bell whispers from the alley. A cap is tipped, a bag exchanged. No one says the name of the hill beyond the town. No one says the hour. The night absorbs their silence and returns it as shelter. In the ward, the nurse learns the trick of listening to the way a sleeping man breathes and telling whether dawn is near. She can tell, too, when a letter from home has arrived. Not by the stamp, but by the way a man holds his shoulders when he reads. She speaks to the room as if the room were a tired friend. She tells the future in small, honest prophecies. The tea will be hot, the stitches will hold, morning will come. She has learned that hope does not have to be loud to be persuasive. It can be a slow, patient thing that tucks itself into seams and underbuttons and in the crease where a photograph folds. In the factory, somebody's laughter curls up like steam and hangs near the rafters, a light touch on a heavy day. The women trade recipes in fragments, jokes in code, and sighs in unison. They scrawl names on lunch pails and keep them like talismans. A forewoman marks time with a stub of chalk, drawing a small star beside each hour's tally. By the end of her shift, the board is spangled. She thinks of the night sky over a quiet field and of how constellations were once stories told by people who needed to know that patterns existed, that the world was not pure accident. She draws another star. Far from the cities, a village learns to live with the feeling that the horizon has moved closer. A woman tends a garden as if it were a library. Beans climb their poles like sentences, searching for a conclusion. Potatoes hide their labor with modesty. She saves seeds, and, with them, the sublime confidence that tomorrow will require planting. She shows a child how to thin carrots, how to read the soil with fingertips. They pause at the sound of a plane that is surely going elsewhere, and the child asks whether the moon hears it. She says, yes. She says the moon hears everything and forgets nothing. At a small table where the lamp's shade throws a circle of gold, two women share the same cup of tea, each pretending to drink more than her share so the other will take more. They compare news and no news, a liturgy practiced until it becomes gentleness. One produces a tiny spool of thread in a color not sold in shops, and the other nods, understanding the message without needing to look twice. They speak of the weather, of the price of soap, of a neighbor's baby who arrived early and exactly on time. The important thing is to keep a language in which the heart can still say what it loves, and then, because nights belong to stories, and stories belong to those who carry them, the city offers a moment so ordinary it gleams. A window is opened to let out the day's last heat. A hand reaches for a switch and pauses. The light remains on a moment longer, just enough for someone crossing the far end of the street to see the second signal. The hand lowers. The night receives the gesture and, tucking it away, makes room for the next, and the next. Dear listener, this is how the ledger fills, with bread divided and fear divided, with messages folded into hymns and courage folded into cheeks that smile anyway, with maps sketched in pencil and erased by rain, then redrawn because the road remains where it always was, between one person and another. The great engines of war roar and stall and roar again, but beneath them the small engines of love keep turning, a domestic thunder that shakes nothing except despair. When historians later write their pages, some of these women's names will surface like stones at low tide. Many will remain underwater, perfectly shaped by the river's steady patience. Yet the bridge could not have stood without them. The night remembers, and so does the morning that follows, removing the veil inch by inch until the city lifts its face and finds, not victory's shout, but endurance's quiet vow. Here we are, we kept one another, and so, in the hush after midnight, We leave them where they always wished to be, close to their tasks, near to one another, within reach of a kettle and a folded message, and the knowledge that every small act is a star in a sky that sometimes forgets itself. The rain lessens. A bicycle bell rings once, small and sufficient. Somewhere, a child asleep turns and finds the cool side of the pillow. A woman at a window counts to 30 and smiles. The ledger closes for now, and the night, which is never empty, carries their whispers farther than anyone can see. Chapter 2. The home front's hidden battles. Morning arrives the way a careful hand turns a page, slowly, without tearing what came before. The town shakes the rain from its roofs and gathers its errands like shawls. Yet, even in daylight, the real work moves in undertones. A line grows at the grocer's door, shoes placed like commas along the pavement. In pockets, ration books keep time, coupons with crisp edges, tiny squares of promise. People speak softly in this queue, as if loudness might melt the butter before it can be measured. The grocer weighs, nods, raps. The paper rustles, a humble music. A woman tucks half her share back across the counter with a small smile. For the next customer, she says, as if kindness were a form of arithmetic that could balance a ledger no one will see. Elsewhere, a kettle hums like a distant meadow. On the table, a loaf is being taught the alphabet of restraint. Slices stand like careful fence posts. A child counts them twice, eyes bright with the privilege of counting, and then the mother makes an extra slice out of air, the way mothers do, thinner, but somehow enough. In the corner, the sewing machine's foot treadles a steady prayer. Old coats are turned, hems let down, elbows patched with quiet bravery. The texture of survival sits in the lap like a cat that knows when not to move. At the back of a cafe, a small book is kept under the till. It records, in tidy script, the names of those who cannot pay yet will pay when the tide of days turns. Every name has a cup beside it, empty for now, but not forgotten. The owner leans across the counter and refills a mug for a nurse who looks as if sleep is something that happens to other people. They trade no fervent words, only courtesies that land like sparrows. You first. No, after you. Take the last biscuit, I insist. Outside, a delivery cart rattles past. The sound is reassurance, a promise that exchange of goods, of glances, of grace, continues. The home front learns the labor of waiting. It waits for letters as if they were weather. It learns the range of a day's sky by the color of the envelope, the curl of a name inked by a hand you could identify blindfolded. When no letter comes, the day lengthens like a road with too few milestones. People make new measures to get through. Knit to the end of this row, then hang the washing, peel the potatoes, and recite the old poem. Sew on 2 buttons, then check the post again. The cadence of tasks becomes a raft. You float by doing. In a small courtyard, a woman kneels in the square of earth she calls her field. Victory Garden, she names it, not in triumph over anyone but in allegiance to the future. Beans climb their rails like notes up a staff. Carrots hide their labor like shy scholars. She crushes time between her fingers and breathes its green, brave fragrance. Herbs are the alphabet of encouragement. They teach pots and mouths how to be generous in little. A neighbor leans over the wall and asks about the tomatoes as if inquiring after a relative. They share seeds like secrets, advice like recipes like family stories that began before the war and will outlast it. The garden becomes a hymnal that the neighborhood sings together in gestures. The watering can passed over the wall, the stake hammered into willing soil, the nod that means you can take what you need. In a train station dimmed to keep the night safe, a clerk learns to translate eyes. Travelers ask questions with their shoulders. Is there time? Will I make it? Do you know if? He answers in the grammar of care. He lowers his voice, and it makes the world feel less jagged. When the loudspeaker calls out delays in the tone of someone breaking bad news gently, he waits until the echo folds itself away and then says, "Tea," as if the question holds the shape of an answer. People discover the kindness that lives in small bridges. A satchel lifted, a seat offered, a thermos passed hand to hand with the respectful silence one gives to holy things. There are other battles stitched into ordinary fabric. A woman who runs a boarding house becomes a curator of thresholds. She learns which guests need laughter left at their door and which require a silence that is not empty but restful. She times the stairs creak to match the song of the radio downstairs, disguising her movements in music so that no one feels observed. At the end of the corridor, a window looks out on rooftops. She stands there sometimes and trains her eyes to pick out good news in distant laundry. White sheets mean a family is managing. Bright shirts mean someone celebrated a birthday and used dye to make a small sunrise on cloth. Across the river, a bicycle is an instrument of mercy. The rider keeps a steady cadence, neither daring speed nor inviting notice. In the basket, envelopes that are only envelopes to those who cannot read the language of tiny crooked staples, of a stamp placed at a slant, of an ink that blushes slightly under certain light. The rider stops to help a man whose chain has come off, their hands pretending to be greasy for an ordinary reason. When it is done, the man thanks the rider with a phrase about the weather whose second word answers a question neither of them asked aloud. They part, to strangers who know each other deeply for one nod's length. Inside a school, desks are islands in a sea where children row with pencils. Not all the children are here, but all the names are spoken each morning with care. The teacher spells out a lesson in which fractions become loaves and loaves become shared lives. A chalk circle on the board becomes the moon. A chalk line becomes the horizon toward which boats carry news no paper will print. She speaks slowly, and the children lean forward. They are learning the most crucial subject: how not to become hard. Each child keeps a small treasury: a button from a father's coat, a ribbon, a pebble with a stripe. During quiet reading, hands slip into pockets to touch these relics and remember that love exists outside of vocabulary. In one modest kitchen, a grandmother teaches a girl the ritual of substitutions. Milk can be coaxed out of almonds, sweetness out of berries, celebration out of an orange saved for a month. The girl learns to zest the peel without angering the fruit. She learns the precise patience required to whip egg whites with a fork, music made with the wrist. When they eat, they close their eyes for the first bite. Closing the eyes is a way to enlarge taste, but it is also a way to say thank you without words. After, the grandmother folds the paper bag neatly and slides it into the drawer. Paper like this will be useful again. Everything will be useful again. She tells the girl that frugality under duress is not starvation of the spirit. It is the choreography of care. Some nights, a siren threads the air, and the town descends into its own root system cellars, shelters, and the spaces under stairs. People pack a small bag that must do everything: hold documents, hold bread, hold the one toy a child would not abandon, even for safety. In the shelter, strangers become the sort of family you huddle with, counting between breaths. Someone starts a story because stories are roofs. Someone else names flowers in a voice just loud enough to be heard by the child beside them. Daisy, foxglove, cornflower, names like lanterns lined up along a dark road. When the outclear comes, it rises like a hesitant bird. People climb back through the skin of the world and re-enter their rooms with a carefulness that feels like reverence. The first thing many do is put the kettle on. Tea is a sacrament no theology could improve. Letters arrive, and their handwriting is architecture. The slope of a letter means health. The hesitation means fatigue. The flourish means a moment of borrowed cheer. Some envelopes carry a smell of oil or engine or pine. People keep these letters in boxes with a string, a suspended conversation they revisit to remember that time is a loop they will one day complete. On days without letters, some write anyway, writing into the quiet as if it could write back. Today the pigeons were very bold. Someone begins, meaning, I walked to the square and did not cry. Mrs. C's boy sold me 3 apples. I think he slipped in a 4th, meaning, people are still kind in the ways that matter most. The cat disgraced herself on your sweater, meaning, your absence lives everywhere in the house, which is the same as saying you are here. Workplaces reinvent themselves as lighthouses. In one office, a typist copies a list that does not exist. She memorizes the rhythm of names as if it were a hymn, then feeds the sheet to the stove where it turns, briefly, into a note of heat that warms her fingers. She walks home with the memory of ashes as a kind of medal. In a print shop, a girl replaces a worn letter in the case and thinks about how certain letters appear more often in wartime. B for bread and blackout and brave. H for hope, which is the same word in every language the hands can speak. She inks the press as if soothing an animal. When the papers roll out, she counts them twice. Not because she doubts the machine, but because counting is how you say, may this reach who it must reach. At the edge of town, a small infirmary treats not wounds but weariness. A doctor watches the way fatigue climbs into a person's voice and learns to lower the lamp of his questions accordingly. He prescribes soup and daylight, and the permission to sit without apologizing. In the waiting room, a poster lists symptoms beside the honest names of help: rest, warmth, company, time. People look at the poster and recognize themselves with relief wider than any doorway. They leave with a folded note that says, in ordinary ink, you do not have to be the bravest one every day. The hidden battles also live in choosing beauty where it seems frivolous. A woman pins a flower made from a scrap of muslin to her collar and walks to the market as if it were a crown. Another paints her front step the color of deep water. A man tunes a violin and plays scales in the early evening with the window open, and the scales run down the street like small bright animals. On laundry lines, pillowcases beckon like flags of truce. People cut their hair at home and swap combs wrapped in handkerchiefs. Mirrors become confessional and comedic. The faces they reflect carry both endings and beginnings with decency. Sometimes, a rumor arrives with sharp teeth. It wants to bite the day into pieces. The home front meets it with the quiet skill of bakers who know how to fold dough without knocking out the air. A neighbor says, let's wait until tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes a shield. Someone brings a newspaper. Someone brings a memory. Someone brings the steady gaze that says, we will not lend our breath to a fire that would eat our table. Rumors, starved, wander off to find another meal. Truth, given bread and a chair, sits and grows strong. Children measure the war by games that teach them how to be gentle with fear. They draw maps in chalk and invent borders that are easy to cross if you are carrying a message of kindness. They build forts out of blankets and keep the door flaps open, because what is a fort for, if not to practice hospitality? They learn to read ration stamps and train schedules and the weathered faces of adults. They become archivists of comfort. The best place to sit under a table during a storm. The exact amount of sugar to make tea tastes like a birthday. The half-sleep when listening to a parent whisper at the window equals safety. At sunset, washing lines surrender their weight and the day stands up straighter. People bring in the pegs and the clothespins clack like tiny bones of birds. In many homes, a ritual, gratitude spoken without ceremony. This lamp still works. This bread still feeds. This bed still remembers the shape of a body and returns it each night, improved by rest. Someone writes a list and then doesn't look at it, trusting the hand to remember what the mind cannot afford to carry any further. Someone else crosses out a fear and writes beside it a task. Tomorrow, mend the cuff. Tomorrow, call on Mrs. K. Tomorrow, plant beans. There is courage in letting the door remain unlocked long enough for a neighbor to knock. There is courage in knocking. There is courage in opening a window to let the smell of rain in, even when it might bring the city's ache with it. There is courage in keeping a joke alive that doesn't make light of anything but helps lift it. There is courage in saving the last piece for someone who hasn't arrived yet. There is courage in sleeping and letting your guard pass to those who are awake, and in waking and taking the watch back without complaint. Night returns, braided with the day's fibers. In kitchens, tins are slid into their quiet corners. In drawers, envelopes settle like birds returning to their trees. A radio ticks as it cools. Far away, the roads are busy with histories the home front can only imagine. Near at hand, the floor creaks in its known places, the house settling its bones. So many unnamed victories. A rumour starved, a garden watered, a room aired, a child comforted, a letter answered, a cake conjured out of cleverness and care. These are not small things. They are the beam and brace of a world the morning will be glad to inherit. And when sleep finally lays its palm on the brow of the town, it brings a dream that is not an escape, but a rehearsal for peace. In the dream, windows are open, and the night is a friend who has brought over soup. In the dream, trains arrive on time, not because of efficiency, but because everyone made room for one another's delay. In the dream, letters are read aloud to the whole street, and nobody minds, because every hope is community property. The dream teaches the body what it will one day do without thinking. Live again in a tempo that forgives and is forgiven. For now, the home front's hidden battles continue. Not hidden to those who fight them, not small to those who witness them, and never, ever lost. The ledger of the day closes with the tidy scratch of a pencil and a pause. Tomorrow waits politely by the door. The town sleeps, and in its sleep, it strengthens the quiet that holds the world together. Chapter 3. Courage in the Shadows. Night is a tender accomplice. It folds around alleys and stairwells, settles on rooftops like a shawl, and turns ordinary doors into portals through which mercy can pass unseen. Where the world believes only thunder counts, the shadows keep a truer ledger. They record footsteps that do not hurry, hands that do not tremble, and choices made so quietly that their echo travels for generations. In a city stitched with canals and bridges, a woman walks as if she belongs to every street. Her basket carries bread on top and the future underneath, pages copied by hand, a scrap of a map, a faded photograph that proves a name once had a face. She pauses where the water holds the sky like a careful mirror. A lantern across the way flutters, then steadies. That is enough. She ties her shawl tighter as if to guard against the night's pleasantries, and steps on, becoming one more line the darkness learns by heart. A baker has learned to measure weight with his ears. Flour whispers down the scale size, paper breathes around the loaf. He has also learned a second arithmetic that belongs to the living, how to subtract fear without breaking it into smaller pieces, how to add courage in pinches that nobody notices until later. Beneath the counter, a drawer that once held ribbons shelters a radio as small as a sparrow. His wife knows its secret better than he does. She keeps its wire wrapped in a darning of cloth, so it won't shine like a lure for the wrong eyes. At dawn, they will be bakers again, scented with yeast and ordinary kindness. For now, they are custodians of a voice that crosses borders the way light crosses a window. Across the river, a seamstress has made a study of hems. There is the truth of a hem that never lets a thread show, and there is the other truth, the one that lets a letter live where no guard will think to touch. Her hands know both truths. She sits near the window where she can hear the street and not be seen from it. She threads the needle and thanks whoever taught her that patience turns time into cloth. When a knock comes, it is soft and expected. The girl at her door is not one of her regulars, but the way she holds her coat says she is here for repairs only courage can afford. The seamstress nods, steps aside, and the house becomes a harbour with no timetable. There is a house whose wallpaper wears tiny blue flowers. Between two blossoms, lower left, a floor can be found if the eye is trained. Behind the floor, a cupboard. Behind the cupboard, a space as narrow as a prayer. The woman who keeps this house has learned to arrange furniture like a strategy. A chair under the doorknob looks like fatigue. A vase of tulips on the table looks like a vow to spring. The lamp is placed to cast harmless shadows that are not what they seem. She cooks loudly to disguise the silence of those who must not sneeze. When soldiers enter, she offers the politeness of a person who does not lose the dignity of her address, even when the postman stops coming. After they leave, her hands shake, then she finds the kettle, then she becomes still again. The cupboard opens, air, like forgiveness, enters first. In an attic room, a woman tunes a radio by the beat of her own breath. Static is a small storm that the fingers can navigate. She writes numbers without looking as if they are notes to a song she remembers from childhood. A melody about rivers that know when to bend. She sends messages with a calm that would shock those who believe courage must be loud. When the night deepens, she unplugs the set and lifts a floorboard that creaks only if insulted. Beneath it, the radio sleeps. Above it, a jar of buttons sits like a decoy, bright and foolish. She places a thimble on top of the jar as a crown, then laughs softly at the kingdom she keeps. Far away and very near, a woman rides a bicycle with a coat too big for her bones and a resolve that fits perfectly. The baskets hold onions and letters. The onions make her eyes water just enough to seem ordinary if questioned. When she crosses the square, the church clock counts her pulse with benevolent indifference. At the corner, a man drops a glove. She picks it up and hands it back, and in the exchange, a tiny fold of paper moves from one life to another. The glove smells faintly of engine oil, the paper of rosemary. Tonight, the rosemary means go by the south gate, and so the city breathes through its smallest lungs. A librarian keeps a ledger of borrowed books and a second ledger of borrowed lives. If you ask for a certain poet, she will give you the poet and, tucked inside the cover, a set of directions to a basement whose door has been painted to look like the wall. She never says the basement aloud. She never says the poet aloud either. She lives among words and understands how to let them mean more by saying less. A nurse on the night train becomes an atlas for strangers. In the hush between stations, she reads faces the way a cartographer reads coastlines. This one needs land, this one needs weather, this one needs a rumor of home. Her cart is a cabinet of mercies, gauze and soup, spare socks. A story that belongs to no one and so belongs to anyone who needs it. Between the carriages, wind writes its baffled script. She answers with bandages and a lullaby hum that steadies even those who claim not to hear it. At one stop, a woman stumbles aboard with a child who carries no luggage but a name. The nurse rethreads that name into the child's jacket with the tidy stitches of someone who knows what must never be lost. There is a classroom where a teacher has turned geography into survival. Rivers are supply lines, mountains are silent guardians, and every child's address is a lighthouse that must continue to shine. She teaches them to read the sky and the newspaper and the silence at supper. She invents a grammar in which the subjunctive tense, what might be, what could be, deserves as much care as the past and the present. She tells them that bravery can be as small as returning a book on time. She tells them that honesty can be as large as keeping someone's secret, even when no one has asked you to keep it. The children copy maps in pencil and erase them only when they are sure the roads have been memorized by the feet that will need them. A woman who once worked the ticket booth at the cinema now works the doors that no one should know about. She can count a crowd at a glance and notice faces without naming them. She knows that hats tell the truth about fear and that shoes tell the truth about direction. She opens a door that looks like the entrance to a storage room and watches as 3 people descend the stairs to where help has been taught to keep very still. Upstairs, she sells licorice from a wooden tray to anyone who needs the comfort of chewing. The licorice disguises the smell of fear and liquor and lies. She is, in this way, still an usher, guiding people to seats that do not exist on any plan. On a hillside, a woman lights a lamp and places it exactly 3 fingers to the left of the window's center. From the valley, the lamp looks like nothing. From the river, it looks like a letter of the alphabet that only a handful can read. She douses it when the dog barks twice and relights it when the wind turns, a conversation held in the grammar of flame and patience. In her pocket is a stone that warmed in her hand during a summer long ago. She touches the stone when she doubts and remembers that the sun still enters into contracts with the earth. Everywhere, people learn the choreography of concealment. A shawl becomes a curtain, becomes a blessing. A recipe becomes a code, becomes a lifeline. A lullaby becomes a schedule, becomes a map. A question like, will it rain, becomes a password like yes, at noon. And everywhere, too, people learn the choreography of revelation. A drawer left slightly open becomes an invitation. A door unlatched becomes a welcome. A teacup turned a quarter turn becomes the sentence the mouth dare not speak. Not all courage hides. Some courage blooms in the open with such gentleness that the eye refuses to call it by name. In a market square, a woman stands beside a stranger whom no one will stand beside. She buys apples and gives them to him one by one, as if they are prayers with skins. Her hands are steady, her gaze is mild. When a boy snickers, she asks him if he can help her carry the bag and thanks him as if he has saved her life. Later, he will think of this moment as the day the world did not tip. At the edge of a wood, a girl leaves bread where the path splits. She does not know who takes it, only that the crumbs are gone by starlight and the birds sing differently the next morning, as if gratitude has a dialect. She keeps at it because repetition is what builds bridges and bread is what carries people across. In the hush of a station, a woman stands with a suitcase that rattles slightly when moved. Inside, nothing but jars labeled with hand-cut paper. Rosemary, thyme, oregano, and courage. The jars clink like a polite choir. She boards a train and rides into a town that has lost its memory of taste. In kitchens where the windows are taped in neat crosses, she opens the jars and reminds hands how to season. She tells them to trust their noses, their tongues, their first instincts about warmth. When she leaves, the jars are empty, but the cupboards are fuller than before. She sleeps that night in a room where the wallpaper has roses. The roses have thorns she chooses to ignore. In a grey office where the clock refuses to hurry, a clerk reads forms until the words become a pattern like embroidery. The pattern hides a cry that has learned to dress itself as bureaucracy. She writes a refusal that is actually an acceptance, a denial that is actually a door, a postponement that is actually a path. She stamps each page with a hand that does not tremble and thinks of her mother teaching her to press leaves between sheets of paper. How the leaves would turn into ghosts of themselves. How even ghosts have shape and veins and purpose. The stamp's sound becomes a metronome by which she measures her belief that paper can be a raft if folded correctly. Somewhere, some women fly. Their planes are made of wood and resolve. Their engines hum like sewing machines. Their roots are written in the moon's kind script. They lift into darkness with the quiet promise of those who bear news too delicate for daylight. They land where dawn has not yet decided what kind of day to be. They speak of wind as if it were a friend with moods. They learn the sound of safety in the rhythm with which the ground receives them. And when they speak of fear, they do so as one might speak of rain. It comes, it goes, and in between, you do your work. Elsewhere, some women dive beneath the ocean of language to pull up codes like pearls. They sit at long tables and share pencils and chocolate, and the kind of laughter that does not need explanation. They crack what was meant to be uncrackable, because no one taught them to worship locks. They send their discoveries into the world like birds with urgent feet. The birds find runways no one else can see. These women will not have statues. They will have friendships that last longer than marble, in a town where the only working clock is the one inside a woman's chest. She learns to count danger by waiting for it not to arrive. She walks a route that never changes and always changes. She knocks on doors she has never knocked on and is greeted like a cousin. Together, they carry out a wardrobe that no longer holds dresses and set it in the street like a boat that will one day be launched. No one asks where the dresses went. No one asks where the boat will go. Asking is not the courage required. Lifting is the courage required. They lift until the wardrobe floats in the air. There are harder moments, and they too happen in the shadows. A searchlight finds a wall and insists upon it. A boot taps a threshold and claims it. A man with a list says names that do not belong to him. A woman answers with the weather, with a kettle that sings at the wrong time, with a child who wakes exactly when needed. The dog barks once, then twice, and becomes a punctuation mark that saves a paragraph from being misunderstood. When the soldiers leave, the room is a mess of normal things. The courage is to wash the cups and sweep the floor, as if every act of tidying is an act of refusal to be remade by fear. And so, beneath lanterns quiet, with windows curtained and streets remembering their paths, the courage of the shadows keeps its covenant with the living. It says, our work is to make dawn possible. It says, our names are less important than the doors we unlock. It says, the world we want will need us to survive the night without becoming the night in time. The stories travel the way light travels after the star is gone. They move through kitchens and bookstores, along quays and over fields. Someone remembers the seamstress's proverb about hems. Someone repeats the nurse's method for deciding if dawn is near. Someone keeps the stone in their pocket and teaches a child to warm it with their palm. The courage changes shape, but not substance. It becomes a joke that builds trust, a song learned in one key and sung in another, a list on a page pinned to a corkboard in a hallway in a century that promised never to forget. If you listen now, in the hush, you can still hear it. The turning of bicycle wheels on a wet street, the clink of jars labeled with herbs and hope, the scratch of a pencil as it writes numbers that will guide a hand safely across a border no map admits. You can hear paper folded, bread sliced, and a latch lifted so softly that even the house decides to keep the secret. You can hear a lantern breathe, and a garden drink, and a library hold its breath for one patient inch longer while footsteps climb the stairs. The courage in the shadows is not an ending. It is a bridge. It is built from planks that look like ordinary days, and rope that looks like ordinary speech, and anchors sunk in the riverbed of ordinary hearts. People cross it without looking down because they trust the hands that made it. On the far bank, morning waits. It is not yet the morning that ends the war. It is the morning that permits the next piece of bread, the next letter, the next lesson, the next lesson, the next landing in a field where the grass remembers being unafraid. This morning is enough. This morning is everything. And as the lamps dim and the rooms return to their gentle shapes, the night carries on its shoulder what it always has. The burdens people refuse to let one another carry alone. A bicycle leans against a wall. A thimble crowns a jar. A map is erased and redrawn in the same motion. In the shadow between two blue flowers on old wallpaper, air once again remembers how to turn itself into shelter. The ledger closes, not with a flourish, but with the steady line of a hand that knows its work and trusts that someone will read it by daylight and understand. Chapter 4. Legacy of Resilience. Morning does not simply arrive after war. It learns the house first. It tests the hinges, remembers which stair speaks, and only then pours itself through the windows. People step into this brightness with pockets already full of habits the night taught them, how to measure, how to share, how to listen for what has no trumpet. And so the legacy begins, not with parades and banners, but with kettles and ledgers, with gardens and doorways, with hands that know their work and intend to keep it. A nurse returns to the ward, now filled with brokenness of a quieter kind. The wounds are older, the bandages cleaner, the ache more polite. She knows that pain does not end when sirens do. It changes accent. She turns her night knowledge toward daylight. Gentle explanations in waiting rooms. The reassurance of a chair pulled close. The dignity of naming what hurts and what helps. Years later, the hospital corridor will carry her step like a familiar song. A student will fall into rhythm behind her, learning by shadow how to walk with steadiness. When the student finally asks how she learned this, the nurse will smile as if offered a memory with sugar and say, "Someone once showed me how to pour tea before I poured advice." In an office that used to keep 2 ledgers, the librarian keeps a new one. It is a list of scholarships for children who read late into the evening under blankets, their eyes burning with that bright hunger that asks the world to be larger. The money is not much. It is always enough. Each year, a name is added, not in triumph, but in gratitude, for safe arrivals, for unbroken promises, for the simple radiance of a mind allowed to go on. The librarian remembers the basement disguised as a wall, and the book that carried directions like tucked-in wings. She remembers how words once moved people through danger. Now she arranges words so they can move them through time. The seamstress opens a shopfront that smells of new cloth and old patience. She still mends hems, still knows where to hide a message if the world forgets itself. But mostly she fits dresses for celebrations that had to wait. Brides come in with laughter that feels like a recovered language. Mothers bring sons who are sheepish about suits. Children stand on stools and swing their feet as the tape measure snakes around their small ribs. When asked if she is ever tired of it all, she answers, "A seam is a promise," as if that explains everything. And perhaps it does. By the river, a woman who once rode a bicycle with onions and letters learns the luxury of riding for no reason. Yet the habit of purpose will not release her entirely. She organizes a circle of riders who check on elders, deliver meals, and carry advice. They do not boast. They ring their bells once at each threshold and leave a week's worth of small certainties behind bread, broth, knitting wool, the address of a clinic, and the name of a lawyer who resolves confusions without hard words. The town grows used to these quiet wheels. The streets, remembering, lean into the cadence. In a classroom where geography once meant survival, the maps are not erased at night anymore. Children color in rivers for their shimmer alone. The teacher still uses chalk like a lighthouse, but now her sentence endings are wider, her pauses restful. She keeps the old lessons folded at the back of her mind. How to recognize the courage of returning a book on time. How to keep a secret without confessing to secrecy. She builds new lessons with the same clay. How to argue without cruelty. How to praise with accuracy. How to let wonder be the engine of patience. Her students grow into adults who stand at city meetings and bend the evening more gently toward justice because someone once taught them what to do with a map and a pencil. A factory that once sang in a hard key becomes a place where hands teach machines to be kind. The forewoman hangs up her chalked stars and replaces them with a calendar dotted not only with quotas but with birthdays, retirements, bake sales for a family in trouble, and a vote on safety rails. Those who learned to rivet, learn to repair, to redesign, to insist that what we build must never crush the ones who build it. When a new girl fumbles the tool, another woman takes her hands and guides them, saying, "Listen with your wrists." It sounds like poetry. It is instruction. The metal, relieved, responds. At tables where ration cards once shuffled like a secondary alphabet, recipes have grown extravagant with peace. But the old resourcefulness remains the steady spine of celebration. People bake cakes from scratch, not because they must, but because a hand's memory is a story worth retelling. Oranges are still zested with solemn joy. Almonds are still coaxed into milk when someone cannot tolerate the other kind. Children learn to whip egg whites as if time itself could be lightened by the right turning of a wrist. The old paper bags, folded neatly so many times, have become drawers full of receipts for things that cannot be bought. Courage, kindness, the neighbor who fixed the hinge and refused payment. A plaque appears on a plain wall one spring, its letters cut deep enough to hold rain. It carries names that were once folded into seams or tucked under floorboards. Passers-by read them without quite moving their lips. Some of the names are complete, others initials only, like a breath taken in but not released. A woman stops, touches the cool metal with a forefinger, and says a word she has not said in years. The word does not thrash, it swims. Birds go on sorting in the morning. Someone leaves rosemary at the base because its scent reminds them of how to travel. A boy asks why it's there, and the woman answers, because memory is an herb we keep alive together. Some recognitions come late, as recognitions do. Papers unsealed. A building is turned into a museum. A photograph, a stranger kept in a drawer, makes its way to a wall where it can be thanked. The women with pencils and radios, those who cracked logic open like a nut and handed out the meat, are spoken of at last in rooms that know how to listen. They smile from those photographs as if nothing they did could be special. They stand beside one another, coats buttoned against the weather, their hair not bothering to obey any doctrine but its own. Friends come to the opening and bring chocolate, because that was the currency of long tables and long nights and careful jokes. But most of the legacy lives in smaller frames. A kitchen table where a child is taught to cut the last piece of cake into 2 pieces that look equal and then choose the smaller one. A doorstep where someone leaves a loaf with a note that reads only, "Today was heavy." A clinic where the receptionist knows which patient needs an appointment, and which needs to be told that today she may sit as long as she likes and read every magazine twice. A community hall where petitions are folded and unfolded with patient fingers. Streetlights here, a ramp there, a park bench under the plane trees. Arguments that are actually love stories about how to belong to a place more completely. Sometimes the legacy is a refusal to forget how to be brave when the script changes. A rumor starts in the market wearing the old boots. It tries to bite the day into jagged pieces as it once did. The women who learned to starve rumors of oxygen bring their old skill into this quiet decade. Let's wait until tomorrow, they say again, and the rumor wanders off, hungry for a different town. Truth is invited in and given a chair, and someone fetches tea, and someone else finds the good biscuits, and the conversation is not about spectacle, but repair. Sometimes the legacy is a widening of thresholds. Doors remain unlocked a little longer. Keys are kept where neighbors can borrow them. Children are reminded that a fort is for hospitality. Simple rituals grow luminous with meaning. Cooling a pie in an open window, sweeping a stoop in the evening, leaving the porch light low until everyone is home. The city becomes a book with many margins. People write in them with soft pencils and helpful hands. Take what you need, says a basket. Bring what you can, says the sign beside it. The basket never empties. The sign never looks tired. The woman with the stone in her pocket still carries it. She now gives stones to children when they turn an age that has a round sound to it. Warm it and keep it, she says. It will remember your hand even when you do not. The children do not understand, which is fine. A legacy is not a lecture. It is a napkin folded beside a plate, a chair pulled out as an invitation, a small weight that educates the palm. On the hillside, the lamp becomes a porch light. It no longer signals a language learned for danger, but habit is a faithful archivist. On windy nights, she still places it 3 fingers left of center, and the valley answers by growing calmer. A neighbor once asked, decades ago, why she liked it in that spot. Balance, she said then, not meaning physics. She means it still. The dog barks once when the first car returns, and twice when the last. Punctuation has remained his calling. The sentences of the house close gently around the ones who belong to them. Women who once guided planes by starlight guide now by streetlight. They do school runs and hospital runs and neighborhood meetings where the agenda is as simple as air, safety, fairness, beauty, rest. They advocate for crossing guards and quiet hours and emergency funds. They do not require applause. They speak with the unhurried authority of people who have seen the world remake itself overnight and prefer, when possible, to work in days. When asked where they learned to chair a meeting so every voice arrives at the table warm, they say, in the dark, and leave it there. Not as a secret, but as a kindness to memory. In certain kitchens, jars still clink like a polite choir. Their labels have changed. Rosemary, thyme, oregano, courage, but also rent relief, books for the class, winter coats, bus fare. The choir grows generous. When coins fall in, they sound like rain returning to roofs that once went without. People drop recipes into the jars as well. How to make soup for 12 from what looks like soup for 4. How to welcome a newcomer with a plate that speaks the language of home. How to apologize, how to forgive before the stain sets. At the town archive, boxes gather from attics and cupboards and the secret back of drawers. Letters come wrapped in string and modest pride. Photographs arrive with the smell of dust and a childhood kitchen. Volunteers wearing soft gloves lift each page as if it might start singing. They catalogue the ordinary, grocery lists that reveal feast days, margins that carry tiny weather reports, and hand-drawn maps that show how to reach a friend without crossing a checkpoint. The archive becomes a second river under the town, carrying silt and glints and stories that look like stones until you polish them with patience. Schoolchildren come to visit and lean in as if history were telling them something in a voice only children can hear. It is, sometimes, the legacy is a hand on a shoulder that stays a second longer than courtesy requires. Sometimes it is a bench placed beneath the one tree that offers shade at 3 in the afternoon. Sometimes it is a woman at a window who notices a figure pause at the corner and decides that today is the day to wave. The wave is returned. The corner inherits a new future from 2 small arcs of kindness. In quiet rooms, grief holds office hours. The women who kept cupboards of air learn to keep hours for sorrow too. They do not rush it. They call it by its honest names. They bring bowls of soup and insist on naps. They sit until the silence unclenches, until laughter returns without shame. They do not treat joy as a betrayal. They teach that memory can be a garden and not only a map of loss. In this way, mourning becomes one of the town's wisest teachers, and no one is left to walk home alone after class. And because legacy is not made of marble alone, some festivals bloom out of the very skills that once kept people alive. A harvest of gratitude appears each autumn in baskets and songs. Children wear paper hats shaped like leaves and recite lines about sharing that sound simple because doctrine is hardest when it is loud. Elderly women judge jam competitions with the severity of saints and the mercy of grandmothers. A booth collects donations for the scholarship ledger and another for winter fuel. By evening, the square glows with lanterns that know how to be enough. Someone plays the violin from an open window, and the scales run once more down the street like bright animals set free. Late recognitions still arrive, as recognitions do. A medal is given in a hall with high ceilings. The woman who receives it wears a dress the seamstress made when hands were learning again what celebration feels like. She bows her head and thinks of the day the floorboard creaked, only if insulted, of the jar of buttons crowned by a thimble, of a sentence that carried a city through a night. She carries the medal home in an envelope and tucks it into a drawer beside recipe cards and a stone that remembers summer. She does not need it to shine. She needs it to be there when a child asks what the word courage looks like. She will hold it up and say, like this, and also like bread. In the end, the legacy of resilience resembles a house well lived in. The rugs remember the direction of feet. The chairs know who sits where and why. The windows keep the light the way a good story keeps its listeners. From time to time, strangers step across the threshold and are not strangers anymore. From time to time, storms come and the house breathes deeper, reminds itself of old skills, fetches candles from the drawer that has always kept them. People open the door to ask, "Do you have what you need?" and leave with lists that sound like hymns. Milk, matches, company. The ledger that began in night ink keeps going, now in a hand that does not need to hide. It records the dailiness of courage, the way it prefers verbs to adjectives, bread to bronze. It writes down the names of those who take the watch when others must rest. It writes down the names of those who rest at last, honored by a town that knows how to stand in silence without making it empty. It writes down the recipes that feed 100 kinds of hunger and the directions to benches where confessions can breathe. If you walk the streets at dusk, you can feel the legacy underfoot, the way an old path holds the memory of cart and hoof and shoes from every season. A bicycle leans in a doorway. A garden measures the day with green rulers. A library glows as if it remembers how it once swallowed fear and returned it as patience. The air tastes faintly of rosemary and paper and rain. You pass the wall with the plaque and read a name you do not know, and still you feel gratitude sharpen kindly in your chest, because anonymous courage is a coin the living spend every day. And so, the legacy is this: an inheritance of ordinary heroism taught in kitchens and corridors, in gardens and offices, in the invisible grammar of how we treat one another when no one is making a speech. It does not demand trumpets. It asks for chairs pulled closer, lamps placed carefully, jars labeled with hope, maps drawn in pencil, and smoothed by hands that trust the road. It asks for the capacity to begin again without announcing the miracle. It asks for the discipline of gentleness. Tomorrow will bring its own errands, its own weather, and its own letters written and not yet answered. But the town is ready the way a well-packed bag is ready, light, deliberate, suited to the road. Those who once worked in shadows walk now in light and do not flinch. Those who once counted to 30 at the gate count now the number of guests who will need an extra spoon. Those who once sang in code sing now in harmony, and what they sing is simple and sufficient. Here we are, we keep one another. In this way, resilience stops being a word and becomes a neighborhood, a habit, a door you recognize at a distance because of the way it welcomes. It moves forward in 1,000 tasks that are their own reward. It is the sound of a kettle rising gently, the scrape of a chair, the shiver of leaves on the hillside when the lamp is placed still. After all these years, just 3 fingers to the left of center. Chapter 5. Their echoes. Today, morning in our century wears new clothes, but the seams look familiar. The streets speak a different grammar, yet the sentences care, courage, and company are the same. Phones glow where radios once whispered. Maps bloom on screens where pencils once traced a cautious line. Even so, the old arts have not retired. They have changed address. They answer to new names and keep the same vows. In a hospital that smells of lemon and light, a nurse ties her hair with the unhurried certainty of someone who has rehearsed kindness until it feels like breath. She wheels a cart that glints with small, practical mercies. Water just warm enough to soothe. A thermometer that does not startle. Words she chooses with the delicacy of a seamstress choosing thread. Masks hide half the face, so her eyes learn to speak in complete sentences. She navigates a corridor loud with alarms and soft with gratitude, makes triage into an art of listening. There are days when the world argues in headlines. She answers with the unarguable. How is your pain now? Here is tea. I will be back. She does come back. The room remembers. Across town, a school breathes children in and out like a generous lung. Desks make shy archipelagos again. A teacher turns her chalk into a lantern. Some days the lantern is a screen whose glow convenes faces from many kitchens, many rooms, and many lives. She teaches the subjunctive what might be and the imperative what we must, and threads them into a lesson on how to disagree without cruelty. When a rumor arrives hungry, she starves it gently with patience and questions. When a child vanishes behind silence, she leaves a window open in her sentence, so the child can climb back in without being watched. In a neighborhood that knows 4 languages before breakfast, a woman runs a pantry as if it were a harbor. Her ledger keeps 2 columns: what came in, what went out. The 3rd column is a margin where she writes the weather of faces. Mr. S looks bone-tired. E laughed today. J's coat is thin. She stocks rice, milk, flour, beans, also toothbrushes, socks, books with pictures of brave vegetables. Volunteers arrive, retirees, teens, a chef between shifts, and the work becomes a choreography of boxes and tenderness. She keeps a jar on the counter labeled bus fare, and another labeled long stories, for those who need to speak beyond the time it takes a kettle to boil. On a hillside that faces a city, a woman tends a small house whose porch light has learned the language of welcome. 1 blink means the kettle is on. 2 blinks mean the door is open. It's only tradition, a charm that makes no demands. But in snow, and during power cuts, and on the nights when sirens write their old script, the light speaks softly in a dialect the town still understands. Here, she keeps blankets folded like promises and a basket of small necessities. Soap, socks, dried fruit that sits beneath a sign whose letters have been traced by many hands. Take what you need, bring what you can. Somehow, the basket remains full. Elsewhere, a librarian turns the circulation desk into a customs station for hope. She checks in not only novels, but job applications, benefits forms, and phone chargers borrowed like life rafts. She hosts a clinic in the back room, tax help on Mondays, language exchange on Wednesdays, and quiet grief group on Fridays, where tea and tissues are on equal footing. She orders more copies of the book that teaches the art of mending sweaters, and more copies of the poem that mends a day. Her favorite transaction is the return of a book long overdue, hand-delivered with embarrassment and relief. She always says the same sentence: "Welcome back." The words are for the reader as much as for the book. A coder sits at a table that used to serve soup and now serves as a desk. On her screen, an open map waits for the world to admit its gaps. She traces roads in places where satellites have looked away, marks clinics, wells, safe houses, names that must be found quickly when a storm or war or wave decides to write itself across the land. Her fingers move with the calm of a radio operator. She drinks coffee from a chipped mug that says, "Fix what you can." At midnight, her cat curls into the curve of her arm. A small weight, a rhythm by which to measure the good impatience of doing. In another room, a woman runs a hotline that answers to many kinds of nights. She speaks to voices who have forgotten the precise weight of their own names. Her tone is a porch light. She does not ask for a map. She asks for a landmark. She does not ask for a plan. She builds one with the caller, one small plank at a time. When the call ends, she writes a few words that will help the next helper inherit the care. She washes her hands the way a nurse taught her long ago, and the gesture rinses the day's ache from her palms. There are hands busy elsewhere, too. A workshop full of quiet machines hums while masks come off the line, not for battle, but for breath. A community garden rescues a parking lot from its heat and replaces it with shade and tomatoes. Seed packets swap corners like letters once did. The soil translates them all. On a Sunday, a group gathers to repair small appliances, kettles, radios, and toasters as stubborn as memory. The fee is a story. The stories are taken in payment and spent immediately on laughter, on advice, on the currency of belonging. In a hall with tired chairs, a meeting convenes. The agenda is ordinary. Lighting on the East Block, safe crossings by the school, a bench near the lake for those who walk but tire. People argue as if the town were a beloved child, firmly, with the intention of staying. The chairwoman holds silence like a bowl and passes it around until everyone has sipped. When the vote is taken, it is not unanimous, but it is honest. Someone brings biscuits. Someone else stays behind to stack chairs. The minutes will note decisions. The floor will remember patience. A gallery hangs an exhibit that would have embarrassed the subjects. Women at long tables, women on bicycles, women in coats too big for their bones, and a resolution that fits perfectly. Captions tell only what must be told. Visitors move from frame to frame as if stepping stone to stepping stone across a river. In a corner, a table invites people to write a name on a card. An aunt who saved every letter. A neighbor who checked the porch light. A teacher whose chalk learned to be a lantern. The box fills. The museum staff, later, will read every name out loud in a quiet room and feel, for an hour, how full a century can be. There are echoes in kitchens, too. Someone teaches a child the recipe for enough, which is not a flavor but a way of stirring. Someone else folds a paper bag neatly and slides it into the drawer with a smile. Heritage preserved by habit. Jars on the shelf clink when the washing machine thumps. Their labels are the familiar choir: rosemary, thyme, oregano, courage, and a few new ones. Rent relief, school shoes, bail, coins, dropped in, sound like rain. On certain nights, a city remembers how to hold one another when the sky goes wrong. Volunteers stand with clipboards and calm voices in a gym that smells of floor polish and bread. Mats become islands. The scoreboard above the court becomes irrelevant. The radio describes distant winds. The people describe present needs. A woman who once tended a cupboard of air becomes the keeper of a doorway. Everyone who passes gets a blanket and their name spoken back to them correctly. Morning comes like a first aid kit. They make coffee. A child who cried at dusk sleeps as if the world has put its hand on his back. Echoes live in the way we use words, too. We say neighbors, and mean anyone within the reach of our willingness. We say home front, and mean the place where we defend one another from loneliness. We say watch, and mean the work of resting while someone else stays awake, and waking to replace them without making a ceremony of it. We say good night, and mean I will see you in the morning, a promise that moves from the scale of a crib to the scale of a street, to the scale of a city that intends to remain a city. In a courthouse painted with years of speeches, a clerk learns to make paper into bridges. She guides those who stumble at forms, language, fees, steps, and she writes, in margins no one reads but her, a weather report of resilience. Mr. R returned, calmer. Ms. L smiled when her name was said, kindly. The twins were proud of their homework. She keeps a bowl of peppermint for nerves. She keeps a chair for those who must sit before they can speak. When asked why she does this, she says, "Because someone once made room for me to stand." Elsewhere, a woman finds herself with a notebook and a long afternoon. She writes her grandmother's name, then the story of the cupboard behind the cupboard, then the recipe for a cake made when eggs were scarce and joy was plentiful. She presses a leaf between the pages. Rosemary, because remembrance is a practical herb. She will keep this notebook near the kettle. Visitors will open it while the water heats and learn, as naturally as they breathe, how to be brave without spectacle. A choir rehearses in a church where the door sticks unless coaxed. Voices climb the scale and find the step where grief rests. The conductor, who once learned silence as a duty, now teaches silence as a measure in music. The piece they sing is older than any microphone, full of breath and willingness. When the altos falter, the tenors lean toward them as if to lend a shoulder. The sound that emerges is precisely the sound of a town remembering how to hold its own weight. Children inherit the echoes as games. They draw chalk maps to treasure that turns out to be a basket of peaches on a neighbor's step with a note, "Take 2." They ride scooters in a convoy that practices stopping at every doorway to check if anyone needs a hand. They build forts whose doors open from both sides. They make badges out of paper and crayons. Reader, fixer, helper, and listener. They bestow these on one another with solemn ceremony and then forget the ceremony, but not the badges. The echoes travel by train and plane and quiet car. A woman on a night bus sees someone shiver and folds her scarf like a small decision. A man in an airport notices a child wandering and becomes a lighthouse for the minutes it takes to reunite the child with the shore. On a ferry, a group of strangers watch a stroller roll and 3 hands reach to stop it. They nod, and the ferry keeps its pace without noticing it carried more than cars. Sometimes the echoes face whether they remember too well. A season of sudden illness, a season of sirens, a season when speech becomes sharp and eats the room. The old skills return as simply as breathing. Are you hungry? Do you need a call? Here is a chair, and here is a list of small errands we can divide. Jars fill, meetings stretch, and then soften. Porch lights learn new rhythms. The ledger opens once more, in night ink and daylight ink alike, and writes down what was given and what came back. Often, what came back is bigger. Not every echo is tender. Some ask for courage that looks like a contradiction, to forgive the forgivable without forgetting the dangerous, to trust again with eyes that have learned to read the room, to say no cleanly when the world needs the shape of that word to bend toward fairness. The women who taught us to starve rumors, to feed truth, to hide what must be hidden and lift what must be lifted, teach us now how to carry anger like water, useful, necessary, never set on fire. And in the quiet after the day sets its tools down, there are still the small observances that make an era coherent. A window opened to let the night in just enough. A letter written on paper when an email would do, because paper carries the heat of the hand. A stone warmed in the pocket and passed to a child who will one day pass it to another. A lamp was placed 3 fingers to the left of center because balance was promised, and promises are to be kept, even when they are mostly reminders. If you walked our streets and had never heard the old stories, you might still guess them from the way the city behaves. Benches placed as if to listen. Signs in many languages that assume trust. Gardens laid out like pages anyone may read. A baker sets aside a loaf before the first customer. A bus driver waits for the extra breath. A clerk stamps the form and looks up to say the name kindly. A librarian lingers at the door as the last patron leaves and says, as she always says, "Welcome back," in case the words need to travel with someone into the night. The echoes do not insist on being called heroic. They prefer their older word, useful. They prefer bread to bronze. They prefer verbs to adjectives. They prefer the discipline of gentleness to the spectacle of rage. They prefer to be taught in kitchens and corridors rather than in stadiums. They prefer porches to podiums, ledgers to trophies, seeds to speeches. They ask for nothing that cannot be given by a hand that has learned to hold and to let go. And so, their music continues beneath the lantern's quiet, beneath the hum of wires, beneath the wings of planes that write new lines on afternoons that have room for everything. The present walks beside the past without stepping on its toes. The future takes notes. Somewhere, a bicycle bell rings exactly once. Somewhere, a jar labeled courage receives the sound of 2 coins and the rustle of a note that reads only, "For whoever needs it next." Somewhere, a woman stands at a window and counts to 30 with a smile, not because danger is near, but because the rhythm still fits the heart. The echoes do not fade. They change the key. They travel in the pockets of those who learned, by example, that history is an invitation to practice. Not a script for repeating, not a statue for staring at, but a garden for tending, and a map for drawing again with gentler hands. In the hush of our evening, they speak as plainly as breath. Keep one another. Chapter 6. What we keep. Evening leans in like a trusted elder. The roofs turn violet. The pavements remember footsteps as if they were warm handwriting cooling on a page. You could call this peace and not be wrong, but the word is too new for what is happening. This is inheritance at work. Quiet hands setting out cups. Lamps finding their old positions. A town rehearsing the kindnesses that carried it through the dark and now carry it across the light. On a narrow street where shop fronts blink awake one by one, the baker pauses, palm on the door as if greeting an old friend. He still measures by ear, still listens for the soft sigh when a scale settles into truth. On a shelf behind him rest 2 loaves that are never sold. They wait for the names no one will say. The custom began when saying a name could endanger a life. It remains because saying nothing can endanger a soul. At closing time, the loaves are gone. He never asks where they went. He sweeps a clean circle on the floor, like drawing breath. The seamstress locks up later than most, a habit she never unlearned. She runs a finger along the day's last hem and hears in its straightness the voices of those who once waited by the door before knocking. She keeps a box beneath the counter where spare buttons gleam like quiet stars. Children come in with torn knees. Brides come in with tremors of joy. Elders come in with jackets whose pockets remember too much. She mends each thing as if repairing the edge of a map so that a traveller will not be lost where it matters. Under the plane trees, the library glows the way a hearth glows, inviting, not bragging. Inside, a woman writes a date in a careful hand and slides a card into a book that smells faintly of dust and hope. In the reading room, a man unfolds a newspaper as if it were a sail and the table a sea. Across from him, a child presses paper flat with both palms before drawing the first line of a very important son. On a cart near the desk, a stack of small notebooks waits, free for the taking. Inside each cover is a sentence. Write what you keep so it can keep you back. Across town, the nurse's corridor holds the day's low music. Wheels rolling, shoes whispering, voices pitched to reassure. She moves through it as steady as a tide. She has learned to recognize the posture of a person who needs permission to rest and the tone of a person whose courage has skidded. She keeps a tin of peppermints that never empties. The tin has a dent that looks like a dimple. When she passes the window at the end of the hall, she rests a second in the square of light, not as prayer, not as spectacle, but as a way to remind the body that it belongs to the day it is in. There is a wall that bears the names. It is not tall. Children can reach the lower lines, and sometimes they do, tracing letters with the reverence you give to a stone that has learned both rain and sun. In the grass below, rosemary grows so fiercely it overflows the bed and asks to be bruised by a passing hand. The scent rises the same green, brave fragrance that once lined parcels and pockets and folds itself into the evening's breath. People come and stand and do not say much. Someone leaves a note, folded small. Someone else reads it later and returns it to its fold, so that the paper learns what keeping means. In an upstairs room with a window that refuses to catch, a woman sits at a desk inherited from an aunt, who taught her to write letters without adjectives unless they are earned. The desk has a shallow drawer where stamps lie like patient birds. She writes a letter addressed only to dear future, and in it she places souvenirs that will not tire with travel. The recipe that fed 12 when it looked like it would feed 4. The proverb about hems. The method for deciding if dawn is near by listening to the way a sleeping person breathes. She adds a small flat stone that warms quickly in the palm and notes, without explanation, 3 fingers left of center. On the hill above the river, a porch light learns its old language again. 1 blink, the kettle, 2 blinks, the door. The woman who tends it no longer listens for boots. She listens for bicycles and the argument of crickets and the small hush that means a neighbor is gathering themselves on the path. She keeps blankets and soap and dried fruit, yes. She also keeps a ledger made of stories. The boy whose coat needed a second lining and now needs none. The nurse who came for tea and left with laughter. The stranger who became a name on a jar and then a chair at the table. When the wind lifts, she secures the lamp with a practiced hand and smiles at the old reflex. Habit is a vault where the best things live. At the community hall, a meeting begins with the same ordinary agenda. Crossings near the school. Benches where the hill grows steep. A winter fund for those whose courage is tired of wearing a brave face. The chairwoman passes the silence bowl. A man speaks too quickly, then less quickly. A woman speaks once and says exactly what she means. The room rearranges around her words, the way a living room rearranges around a prom. Votes are taken, biscuits appear. Chairs are stacked in the hush afterward by people who linger not because they are lost, but because belonging is a pleasure you don't rush. There is a garden where beans climb like declarations, and tomatoes ripen with the patience of clocks. Children plant with the solemnity of acolytes, and water with the glee of liberties. A sign reads, "Take what you need, bring what you can." Another sign, in smaller letters, reads, "Stories accepted here." A woman sits on a low wall and tells one the kind without a hero. Unless you count the kettle, the shawl, the drawer in the wallpaper, the bicycle wheels that spun through rain, as if rain were simply a shawl the sky had to wear. When she finishes, a boy raises his hand and says, "The kettle is a hero," and the garden agrees. In a quiet museum room, photographs breathe. Women in coats, women at long tables, women with pencils, women with radios. The frames do not explain much. They have learned that too many words tire the truth. On a table nearby, a stack of cards invites names. Who kept you when the world was not sure where to place you? People write, "My mother and the orange she saved for Christmas." My neighbor who counted to 30 at the window. The teacher who turned chalk into a lantern. The baker whose loaves waited for no one and everyone. The staff, later, will read the cards aloud until the room fills with a sound like rain inside a house that has learned how to be warm. There is a house whose stairs still speak. The cupboard behind the cupboard has been opened to daylight and lined with blankets for grandchildren who build forts with generous doors. One afternoon, a girl finds a thimble on a jar and asks why the buttons look like candy. The grandmother tells her the story and then tells her another. And by the third, the girl understands that a seam is a promise, and a promise is a seam. You keep it so lives don't fray where they most need to hold. The girl pockets a stone. Later, she will place it in the palm of a friend who is nervous before a journey. Warm it, she will say, and keep going. On a platform where trains keep honest time, a clerk watches faces with his old grammar. He sees a woman hesitate and corrects the world with 2 words. This way, he sees a boy balancing hope and a too heavy bag, and without ceremony, he lightens both. He has kept 1 sentence from the night years, tea. He says it still, and the steam that rises from the cup carries an old treaty between strangers. While you drink, you are here, and here is safe. Even the city's air seems jointly held. Smells of bread and ink and rain braid themselves. Bicycles ring once as if rehearsing restraint. Windows open their throats and let the evening in. A violin practices scales from an upstairs flat, and the notes run down the street like bright animals kept as pets by everyone. Under a lamppost, 2 people argue without making the air sharp. Under another, someone laughs alone at a book, and then, catching themselves, laughs for the block. So the world will know that laughter is communal property. Not everything is gentle. Weather returns with its old teeth from time to time, storm, illness, a rumor wearing an expensive coat. The town answers with its old arts. Doors remain unlocked long enough for a knock to become a greeting. Jars rattle into fullness. Meetings stretch and soften. The wall with names gets polished by rain and hands and respect. The ledger opens, night ink alongside day ink, and the lines that record what comes in and what goes out keep their clean columns. Nobody balances them. Nobody needs to. The arithmetic is the same as it ever was. Add courage in pinches, subtract fear without breaking it into pieces that scatter. A woman climbs the hill to the porch light because she has been thinking of someone she loved who has turned into weather everywhere and nowhere, a sky the mind returns to for shade. She sits on the step and counts to 30, an old habit that fits the heart even when danger is far. The lamp waits steady. Down in the town, the library closes its doors as tenderly as if tucking in a child. The baker wipes flour from the counter with a circle that could be a moon. The nurse hangs her stethoscope like a necklace of listening and walks home with a slow, earned step. Children chalk a map onto the pavement, their borders generous. They place a star wherever someone will offer tea. There are many stars. They draw a bicycle with long, confident wheels, a radio with a friendly face, a kettle with steam that curls like handwriting. A passerby adds a jar labeled courage and drops 2 coins of pretend money in pretend. But the children cheer because pretend is the oldest currency of hope. When the first drops of night appear, they blow on the map the way you blow on soup to make it kind. The teacher locks her classroom and lingers in the smell of pencil and paper and afternoons. On the board, she has left a sentence not as homework but as an inheritance. Keep one another. She has been writing it for years, in different forms. Tidy your table. Here with your eyes. Wait your turn. Bring an extra spoon. If you stay very still, you can hear the sentence continue even after the lights go out. A chalk ghost that knows the way home by listening to children breathe. At the museum, the last visitor places a card in the box and turns toward the door. On the way out, she notices a small frame near the exit she hadn't seen before. Inside is a photograph of a porch light, slightly left of center, no caption. She smiles, and there, in the doorway, she feels the old companionship lift like a shawl around her shoulders. The night outside is not an enemy, it is a room. Lamps are already lit inside the houses on the street. She steps into the room as if returning, and in a way, she is. When the hour grows soft, the town performs its evening rite. Kitchen windows open to let in a spoonful of dark. Letters are finished with that good honesty paper that knows how to teach. A stone warms in a pocket. A garden drinks. Somewhere, a bicycle leans against a wall and understands its own small glory. Somewhere, a jar receives 2 coins, then a note that reads, in a careful hand, for whoever needs it next. Somewhere, on a hill, a lamp remembers a sentence without words and answers it by shining. That is what we keep. The grammar of gentleness, the authority of small acts, the craft of turning rooms into shelter and days into bridges. We keep the recipe for enough and the ledger that knows how to tally grace. We keep one another by the oldest methods, bread and chairs, names said kindly, thresholds widened, rumors starved, truth given a seat near the kettle. We keep the door the way a song keeps its chorus, ready to be picked up by any voice that wanders in. And when the night comes, as it always does, generous and unhurried, we do not bar it out. We meet it with a lamp placed exactly where the hand remembers. We meet it with the porches of our patience and the windows of our welcome. We meet it with jars and ledgers and the practiced art of listening for footsteps and calling out, "You're just in time." The sky leans close. In its vast, kind script, it writes the only ending we have ever wanted and the only beginning we require. And so the night falls quiet, carrying their whispers into silence. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss another whisper in the night. Until we meet again, good night.